Hello, RTM fam. This is Malin. Actually, kind of regretting that I opened it that way. Sorry about that. Just wanted to hop on here for just a few minutes and say hello. Jamie and I, we are busy with creating season 3. We've done a lot of planning work. We have guests lined up, and we are actually starting to record. So, our first season 3 episodes will be downloading in late August, so please look for those. Jamie's not actually with me today, so she is taking care of some personal items as well as taking some time off. And I know in her profession, she's been really busy, so I decided I would come on and kind of release a special, I think we're calling it our summer episode. It's considered a bonus episode. So Jamie and I, months ago, actually recorded with another podcast called Becoming Human AF. And the host for that show, it's actually two Stephs, and they go by two Stephs. We actually recorded an episode with them on empathy, which we thought was very good. So we wanted to release it on our channel for all of you that maybe haven't heard it yet. Want to give you an opportunity to listen. And then also, if you have an opportunity to go over to Becoming Human AF podcast and take a couple, listen to a couple of those episodes, they are really great. The Stephs do a good job taking topics and breaking them down. And what I've liked about their episodes and their podcast is they're really going from the ground up on, defining good definitions in the space of having difficult conversations, and how do you respect other people in the space and where they're at as a human. And then kind of moving through some of those layers of life that are hard sometimes. So I would encourage all of you to please go over there and listen to an episode or two. I will mention that this audio quality, it is unedited from my perspective. The Stephs were kind enough to share it with me, so I'm just going to drop it as is. So you'll see that there's a little bit of dead space from time to time, or a couple ums. Please bear with us. We just thought it would be really fun to kind of release it in its raw form. We think it's a very interesting and cool conversation about empathy. If you've been listening to our podcast now, you've known that I am not as strong in this empathy field as Jamie. So it is a very great conversation for me to be in, because it helps me sharpen that tool. And we'd also like to know, after you're done listening to it, hit us up on some of our socials. We're back on X now. We also have our Facebook page. And just let us know what you thought about it. And if you would like to hear more of these types of episodes and collaborations, Jamie and I would love to get those going. But just let us know what you thought. And, where are you at in the empathy meter? Are you a strong empath, or are you just somebody that doesn't think it's important, somewhere in between? We'd love to hear your opinions and all about you. So, well, with that said, I hope you guys have a great rest of your June. I hope your July is even more amazing. And we will definitely be back in August with our new episodes for season 3. We may or may not have another bonus summer episode in July. We're still kind of working on it. So if not, we will see you back in August.
Hello and welcome back to the Becoming Human AF podcast. I am your co-host, Steph Laffy.
And I'm your other co-host, Steph Taylor.
And today we are joined by two awesome podcasters from the Roundtable Mindset. We will let them introduce themselves in just a minute, but we're going to be talking all about empathy. And I don't know what's going to happen today, but I think this is such an important topic. And I think that there's a little bit of a lack of empathy in society right now. Some people might, I don't know, but we'll see where it goes.
Yeah, I think we definitely need to bring it into balance because I feel like some people are super empathetic and then other people aren't empathetic, or there's, different variations depending on the topic. And when we're talking about hard conversations, you gotta have some form of empathy in order to make progress, I feel like. So what about you guys? So Jamie, Malin, how about you guys introduce yourselves and kind of give a little idea about how you feel about empathy?
I feel like I should let Malin go first. Malin's got a lot to say about empathy.
So first of all, this is Malin. So thank you very much for having us on. We are super excited to be here. I got to be honest, just to kind of plug this a little bit, I am binge listening to all of your past episodes, and I find them incredibly interesting. And I kind of argue a little bit with either one of you on a certain topic. So I just kind of want to put that in there. So thank you for making those past episodes and allowing us to come on. So as Jamie kind of tried to throw me under the bus, thank you, Jamie. Empathy is probably one of those things that I struggle the most with. So do I think that I am a loving person, a kind person, an understanding person? Yes. But then when you ask me, do you think that do I ask myself or do I have somebody else ask me if I'm a very empathetic person? I would have to begrudgingly say, I don't think that I am. I've gotten stronger in this space, but it doesn't come natural to me. And so I do think that there is a difference between being kind, being loving, caring for people, and then also being empathetic. And before I pause to let Jamie kind of give her 2 cents, I do think there's a sense of you can also be overly empathetic, and it can be kind of a negative for you or the people around you. So that's kind of where I stand with the whole empathy. Jamie, what about you?
I was going to say, let me dodge the bus real quick because he just sent it right back at me. Like maybe I'm over empathetic or something. No, it's funny because our first season of podcasting, this ended up being like a recurring theme, I think, in what we had talked about. And at one point, Malin's like, if you say the word empathy one more time. And it
literally it was on one of the episodes. I was like, say it again, just one more time. I dare you.
But I do think, it's I feel like of all of the skills that I have grown in as an adult, this is probably the one that has been the most helpful in relationship, in dealing with not just the people that are close to me, but also in understanding where people are coming from when it's not in my wheelhouse or something that I naturally understand. If I can stop and practice empathy, I've learned that really helps me not just understand where they're coming from, but really understand that I don't understand a lot of things. You know what I mean? And that helps me keep an open mind when I go into interactions with people who I don't agree with a lot. So that is kind of the thesis of roundtable mindset. If we're being super honest, that's, Malin and I are pretty opposite of one another, and we try to bring those perspectives to lots of different topics. And empathy, I feel like empathy is what helps us do that well when we practice it well.
And we're going to unveil the first definition, or we're going to unveil this definition for the first time. Jamie and I have a lot of conversations outside of our podcast. And one of the terms that I've kind of coined, and I think Jamie, without speaking for you, she kind of enjoyed, is the term of being selective empathy. So I would categorize myself as having selective empathy. There are times when I want to execute more, and there's times when I want to pull some away. And I feel like that's a healthy balance. Now, I'm sure people will disagree, and I hope this conversation kind of can go through that a little bit. But that's kind of where rock bottom is. That's where I'm at. I choose when to give more empathy and when I pull empathy away from people. And I think that's okay. I think a lot of focus comes on you have to be as empathetic towards people as possible, which sounds like a great thing, and I'm sure it is, but it comes at a cost. And there's sometimes I think people are paying that price when they really can't afford it. And I think that's when it becomes a detriment.
I'm loving this. And here's one of the things that keeps coming up for me when you're talking, Malin, about your perspective on empathy is I'm curious if that has to do with like a masculine feminine type of thing where men are a little bit more like logical doers and the women have more of that like nurturing feeling part of it. So if there's a correlation potentially there as to why you're not necessarily as empathetic as someone like Jamie, perhaps. And then there's also the, what does empathy even mean and look like versus, it is to me understanding someone's feelings and perspective of the situation. So the saying, put yourself in someone else's shoes. What is the experience they're going through? I'm curious as to whether or not you look at the actions or like the environment someone's in over their feelings, or if you consider their feelings in that perspective shift.
So there's a lot there that you asked, Steph, that I could probably touch on.
Just go with what you remember.
So and I'm going to say for me, and I can't speak for all men in the world, and I can't speak obviously on my perspective on the female side of it. But I think for me, I think gender does play into it. I think there are some elements that that are there when we're dealing with empathy and how we process it, because you're talking to someone who believes very, very much that there is a difference between a man and a woman, even beyond the physical traits. And that also, I think, leaks into our personalities, our decision makings, and also how we see the world. And for me, I have quite a few, guy friends who, and this isn't saying that women can't think logically, but that's kind of their mode of how they start processing first and foremost. So, in fact, Jamie and I just had a conversation before hopping on, and she was explaining something to me, and I went right into fixing mode. And she was like, I just needed you to hear me. I don't need you to fix it. And in my brain, you have a problem. I'm here to solve it. That's how I'm showing you care and concern. And that's how I'm showing you that I'm invested in this friendship or I'm invested in this problem. But the last thing I go to is empathy. And if I would have applied a little bit more empathy to that conversation, I'm sure I would have shifted and said, you just need someone first and foremost to hear what the problem is. And that's kind of where it ends. That's where I get myself into the most trouble. So for me, I kick into when I hear a problem or someone's having a difficult time, the way that I show that person care and kindness is let's solve this problem for you. How that translates a lot of times is I think I know more than you do. You're not listening to me. All I'm needing is an ear, not someone to come in and tell me all the things that I'm doing wrong. And that's where I think a lot of this gets misunderstood in my opinion, is in these conversations, in these relationships, especially if you're dealing with someone who's not very strong in the empathy department, don't just assume that they are there to hurt you or hurt the situation. They may not understand the emotional spectrum as well as you do, but that doesn't mean that their intent isn't kindness or trying to help in some way. That just means that they're not focusing in on your feelings, but they're focusing in on the problem.
Mm-hmm. I love that you just said that. I actually struggled. I don't know if I've ever said this on the podcast or really out loud before, but I struggled with empathy until something happened about almost exactly 3 years ago to the day. I had a friend who was going through some shit, and I was always like I'm like a very masculine kind of girl, so I think logically first, and then I worry about the emotions naturally. And one of my best friends was going through something, and she kept telling me, you're not hearing me, you're just trying to fix me. You're not listening. You're just trying to like tell me what you think. You're just trying to tell me your thoughts, and you're not actually being helpful, because all I need for you to do is hold space for me and listen and just be a shoulder. And I didn't understand what the hell she was talking about. But that experience, going through that with her, it's what it almost like cracked me wide open. And ever since then, I have been going above and beyond to try to lean into empathy, lean into my feminine side, and become more of an empathetic person. And now I almost have the opposite problem, where I've gone so far in the other direction that I'm like, oh, I hate this. Why am I so empathetic? Like, I just make it stop. So I'm kind of coming back towards the center, which is where I would like to be. But it was just interesting that you were saying, like, as you were talking, Malin, I was like, oh my goodness, like, I feel like I'm listening to myself. Like, I struggled for so long with going to the feelings first. I always just wanted to, like, immediately jump into problem solving solutions mode. And so I guess my point there is, like, it is possible to shift. You just don't want to pull what I did and shift so far to the other side that, like, it's like you're emotional all the time.
Well, and something Malin doesn't know probably is that even being able to sit in a space and tell him, I'm just trying to explain where I'm at and not pose a problem for you, right? That's 10 years of growth for me. I remember my daughter she was about 10. We were in a drive-through, and the guy in front of us, it was breakfast time. The guy in front of us, all of a sudden was screaming and threw his drink over his car out the driver's side and like was screaming at the person in the window and then tore off and left. And I was outraged. I was like, oh my goodness, like these poor people. And my daughter looks at me and she says, Mom, maybe he's just having a bad day. And I was like, what? And she's like, well,
wow.
You don't know. What if his mom's in the hospital? And I was just like, it was that moment that I was like, okay, wait a second. Like we see such a tiny bit of a person's story and the amount of time that we get to interact or observe them. And that was kind of a beginning for me in really thinking, even if I don't know what's happening, to know that there's possibilities beyond what I'm seeing was like a new concept for me. And I don't know, I feel like this is something that has grown over time for me personally, but I do feel like if I think developmentally how we evolve as people in general, between like the ages of 15 and 25, I think we're pretty self-centered, right? Like we don't observe the world much beyond the end of our nose anyway. And so I don't know that we all are born with some supernatural empathy button or something. I feel like it's something that has to develop over time. I'm just grateful that I was made aware of it, because I don't know that I would have considered that had I not had these things come up in my life that have made me aware of it even. So I don't know that it's odd not to feel like you have a ton of empathy when you're younger. I guess I also would love to take my dear friend Malin to task in saying that I don't know that empathy, well, and maybe Steph, it's you. I don't know, but I don't know that empathy is necessarily, I would hate to see empathy be categorized as feminine or masculine or the lack thereof. You know what I mean? I think that there are a great deal of men that show a huge amount of empathy, and I know women and was a woman who had very little for a long time. So I don't know that it's necessarily masculine or feminine. I do think, though, that our society puts an expectation that women are more feeling, and therefore we must have a better understanding of someone else's feelings than a man does. But I don't know I don't think it's inherently gender specific, in my opinion, but.
Yeah, and I don't recall saying that they were specifically associated with genders. I do think, though, that genders respond differently. And I think if you look at a 50,000 foot view, it would not be surprising to me if we had to make that categorization to say who has the stronger empathy muscle, men or women. I would think you poll 1,000 people, 100 people, I think you're going to find women tend to be more empathetic than men. And generally speaking, and there's always outliers, doesn't make one gender stronger or weaker than the other, although that's an area I would like to discuss because I think society does put value on that, right? And I know when you're talking about feelings, I'm going to go back into my past now, there were a lot of other skills in my life that I had to learn before I got to starting to understand my own emotions and feelings. And at the very bottom below that was the emotions and feelings of other people. Now, a lot of that could be because of my gender. Some of it could be of how I was raised, the location in which that I grew up. But I think those are all factors because, you know, back when I was a kid, being a boy, you skin your knees, it physically hurts. Everybody wants to focus on that, but nobody wants to focus on the emotional needs of a child, of a boy who got hurt at that time. Versus you go over to my sister when she was a little girl and she got her emotional needs fixed as well as her physical needs fixed. So I think we have a generational, how people were grown up from different generations that were still fighting against that. So you have, you know, younger generations, in my opinion, who are getting both of those physical and emotional needs at least met better than the previous generations. And now you have these clash of people saying one generation is maybe less empathetic than the other when we're not taking in the full scope of the picture. And I think by design almost, and I don't think we were trying, I guess when I say by design, I think it was orchestrated that way because for the longest time, society didn't view the need of having men or boys have strong empathy or emotional needs. And that's not saying it's a blanket that all men are robots and all women are just silly little, you know, feeling flower dancers. I don't know what the word is coming to mind. But my point is there was a difference back then. And I think that is starting to shift, which is good. But that's something we have to deal with even in today's society.
Yeah, I am loving everything that you guys have said. When I was talking masculine, feminine, I wasn't talking in terms of genders, but more like that
gender, like the feminine energy versus masculine energy.
More that, because it does flip in genders, and you kind of get to naturally choose the type of personality you end up having, and it can change, but just like your sort of innate go-to. But I do agree that society has a big influence on that, on how you are raised. And there is absolutely, like me as a parent of young kids, I recognize that too, of how there is a big difference in how we have treated each gender and then their place in society, which becomes very clashing from previous, like how our parents were raised and then how we're raised, and then the world that we live in now is very different. Yeah, there's so much, and I don't even remember. Oh, Steph, when you were talking about you used to be the more fix it like Malin was. And it actually caused me to think and kind of go back and go, yeah, no, I'm like that too. If someone comes to me and they're venting about something, I start to see the solutions. I start to see where they're blocked. I start to want to help them in that way. And that's probably because I'm not the one feeling the emotions, right? Like my judgment, my logic is not clouded by the emotions. And unless I tell myself, be empathetic, repeat what they're saying, you know, meet those emotional needs, my brain's just automatically going to, oh, let me help you. Let me solve that problem for you. And so, Jamie, when you were talking about your self-advocacy, that you then learn to say, no, I need you to hear me. I need you to be here. I don't need you to fix it. I need you to just listen so that I have a place to vent. And someone says, yeah, I can understand why you would feel that way. That's what you need to move forward. It's not that you can't solve your own problem. It's that you just need to have that, you've got the scraped knee and you need somebody to hear that it hurts. It's not just that your knee's bleeding and you need a Band-Aid, but that hurt and that felt scary, and that's okay.
Yeah. Well, and I do think I work in a helping profession. So everyone that I work with, they are all the helpers, right? They are the people. And I would actually say that I think the fixers, I don't know that that is even a cutoff line either, because most of the people in the work that I do, we come to this work naturally as fixers. But most of us are bringing that energy of, I had a space where I needed I needed a fixer, I needed a helper, I needed someone to be there for me in that way. And I want to be there for others in that way, which I think is a form of empathy also, I do think, interestingly, as we're talking like generational and how we were raised and things like that, I was actually raised by a pretty firm, not pretty firm feminist. My mom was as big of a feminist as anything I've ever seen. And so she taught me, you don't cry in the boardroom. You know what I mean? Like all of those things that to show strength, to show equality, to show, the ability to handle those things. And I think that, as we're talking about that piece of it, I think that is it's probably part of why it took so long for me to get there as an adult. I hope I have corrected some of that with my own kids, because we definitely talked about, when they were younger, well, imagine what it must have sounded like from their perspective. What you said, how do you think they heard that? Or, to try and help them see outside of their own experiences. But I think it's such I wonder if there's times where it feels less necessary. And I wonder if the time that we're living in makes empathy feel like it's more necessary than it might have in the past. But I don't know. That's an interesting thing to think about.
One of the biggest issues that I have with empathy is that it feels like even with our conversations that Jamie and I have had on our podcast and in our personal lives, is it feels like there's this expectation or this need to say, you need to be empathetic. And I'll take myself and focus on me for just a second. I have grown and I've learned and I've tried to strengthen that empathy muscle for me. And I think I've achieved it. But in all of those conversations, there's like no discussion on when have you arrived with that empathy? Meaning there's no end to it, right? Somebody who only thinks about people's emotions and maybe guides their life decisions based off of their emotions and how other people are feeling, to me, they are still learning and trying to be even more empathetic than that. And so I guess the question I'm going to pose to this group is, can you have too much empathy? Is there examples in your life and situations in your life where you can say, I was too empathetic, and if I would have pulled that back a little bit, my either decision making or the outcome of the situation may have ended up being better, even if that means that the person might not have felt that it was better, but overall it would have been a better outcome than actually what happened, if that makes sense.
Oh, I mean, I can think of so many different examples where like I don't like to see other people sad, like at all. I just it breaks my heart when other people are upset, especially if it's because of something that I said or did, even if maybe they're misinterpreting me. So I have many times gone out of my way to try to fix something that either A, wasn't mine to fix, or B, like I would take it almost too, like I would just go almost too far with trying to like either apologize or make them feel better, when it would have been better to just let them, give them space maybe, or let them deal with it on their own. I find that my people pleasing habits tend to kick in real hard when I'm like upset that somebody else is upset. And all that does is dig me a deeper hole. So I'm struggling to come up with a specific example that I want to share here on the podcast. But that's just like my initial reaction to that question.
I certainly think that you can be way too empathetic where it crosses that line and becomes more toxic behavior where you're not like Steph said, somebody else needs to solve their own problems. They need to recognize and they can't just stay in victim mode with you being empathetic towards them. Part of empathy is also allowing other people to sit in their own grief and come out of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can be there and hear them, but you also need to be a little bit of a hard ass. Like every one of us needs an ass kicking and like, that bitch slap, that all the stuff where you need that devil's advocate sometimes to get you moving. But you also do need somebody who is like a little bit of a therapist where they put it back on you of, I hear you. And so what next? Like, why? All that kind of stuff where it is a nuance. It's not like a hard line. It is a nuanced thing that you end up learning through going through your own challenges of, how do you communicate with other people? What is it that you need from other people? And recognizing where part of that ownership when you're whining, I don't want to say whining, but like you are venting your own problems where it's like shit or get off the pot. Like you have to solve your own problems. Nobody else will. And if somebody's just going to be super empathetic towards you and solve all of your problems, you're never going to grow up. So there's definitely a line of being too empathetic or not empathetic enough where like, it's a learned nuanced part of life, the journey of.
Yeah. Well, and actually what you're saying, what all three of you have said is kind of reminding me, we did an episode about like empaths, being empathic. And I feel like you're almost touching on that. I think empathy it's a skill, it's a tool, it's necessary in relationships. I think that we all need to have empathy on some level, right? When you go way too far to the other side is when you label and maybe you don't label. I label. That's bad, but I'm going to do it anyway. Those people, they're like, I'm an empath and I understand what everyone's feeling. And then they can prescribe your feelings for you. And then they can, it affects them. Like I can walk into a room and I feel everyone's feelings and it makes me crazy. And I have to go home and I have to hang out in my bedroom by myself with my headphones and shut the world out. And so much of like the work, I work in mental health, and so much of the work that we do talks about like anxiety is important. It's important to be anxious about things because anxiety teaches us how to be safe, right? I should be anxious about the bear that is hanging out in the next door neighbor's yard. It's probably important for me to have a little anxiety about that. When it gets unhealthy is when that anxiety starts impeding my life and changing the way I live day to day, right? And I think that that's an important thing to remember with any of these skills. And I find this an important topic because I do feel like there are a lot of spaces where empathy is lacking. I have seen the spaces where it's far too, like there's too much weight put in it, or there's too much inappropriate use of empathy. But it's an important topic, but I do think it's important to remember that it can be too much or too little. There's always, I don't know. It's like a balance. We need to be balanced people, right? Like we need to be able to use it and then be able to jump on our kid's bed and say, get to work, it's time, right? It's just
fun. Like we were talking about before we hit record, the world needs more balance and empathy, where we've got people that are too empathetic and it's gone to the version where it is kind of that toxic or you've got like an ego value on it of like, I understand everybody's feelings, or I want to understand everybody's feelings, and I'm going to advocate for them. And it becomes that. And then there's other people where it's, I can't possibly understand what anybody is going through. They're just wrong. They're just absolutely wrong. And it's not worth even trying to understand their perspective. I cannot put myself in their shoes because they're just wrong. So the world needs more of the balance. And in order to have those conversations to move forward, you do need to be open to understanding the other person's perspective. And in order to do that, that I feel like is where empathy comes in. Because to understand someone's perspective, you have to know what those feelings are like, right? Like you need to relate it to yourself. And Malin, go right ahead.
Well, when you were saying this, something triggered in my mind, and I'm going to ask this question. If you had somebody who was 110 pounds, skinny arms, just really thin, or you had a 295-pound ripped bodybuilder, when you looked at both of them, which one would you expect to be able to lift more? Would you expect them to both lift exactly the same thing?
No.
So from an emotional perspective, I think the understanding of balance, I agree with, as much as some person can. Kind of making it about me for a second, my empathy meter is not going to look the same as I know Jamie's empathy meter and maybe your guys' empathy meter. So to me, I think the understanding needs to be you're not going to be at the same empathetic level that I'm at, but maybe that's because that's what you can do right now. And maybe that 110-pound person who can't lift as much, the best that person can ever get to is maybe 135. You see what I'm saying? Like, that's just not part of who they are. And I think as we start talking about empathy more and trying to bring that balance, I think if we take a step back and really look at everybody, not everybody is going to achieve the same level of empathy as another person. And that doesn't mean that they are less than or that they are evil or just cruel. It means we all have our own physical traits that we can accomplish. And there's some of us that have our own emotional traits. Now, I think the problem is on the outliers, right? Like we've talked about them. If you have someone that's not very empathetic and they're like, feelings suck and nobody's feelings matter, and I'm a rock and I have no feelings, that's a problem. All the way on the other side is don't tell me how you're feeling because I'm going to tell you how you're feeling because I just feel it. That's also the problem. But when you were talking stuff, it made me think, well, there's an understanding I think we all have to get to, and that is not everybody's going to be able to get to the same level of empathy. And who gets to decide what the balance looks like anyways, right? Like if we all have our own perspectives and we all have our own what we can perceive as reality, now I'm judging your empathy muscle based off of mine, and you may be way more empathetic. In reality, in your circle of friends, people might be barking at you being like, why aren't you more empathetic to my understanding? And I think that's what I want to focus on. Is not so much as everybody has to meet in the middle. I think we all have to realize what is somebody's ability when it comes to the emotional spectrum, specifically empathy.
Absolutely. I think we all have like a certain, like kind of what you're saying is we all have a certain level of like emotional capacity. And it's like, what am I dealing with at this current moment in time? What am I dealing with in general in my life? And how much more emotional, not baggage, but how much more emotions from other people do I have the capacity to absorb without my own life just completely falling apart? Because I only have so much to give. Like, if I'm currently, let's say, dealing with, a sick parent, God forbid, and, my finances are falling apart, I just lost my job and I'm not feeling so well. Well, how much capacity do I really have to, like, let's say, help the homeless people in my neighborhood, right? Like, I only have so much to give. And I think that we need to, if we're going to demand empathy from everybody, like, I think that we need to maybe practice what we preach and be empathetic to like everybody else's situations, understanding that like maybe they just don't have the capacity to give that much more emotional like bandwidth to other people.
Yeah, absolutely. Like that empathy exists on a spectrum, and it is a skill that you can explore and strength, like a muscle that can be strengthened. And it's just about understanding somebody else's perspective. And you get to choose whether you do that or not, whether you have the capacity to do that or not. That's exactly it. And to me, when I was talking about like the world as a whole, I think I was saying more from the perspective of people yelling and shouting. Those are probably more the outlier people. And so that's like what we're hearing, where it doesn't seem like, they're coming into a conversation without the capacity or the desire, maybe, I don't know, to understand somebody else's perspective, is more what I was saying in terms of like the balance is like, can we open up a conversation on, let's go neutral, let's bring it back down, do you have the capacity to take part in this conversation, versus yelling and screaming at people and accusing them of not doing whatever it is you want them to do, right? Like, if you're going to be part of the conversation, I think you need to take ownership of your own capacity.
Yeah. Well, and I think that this is probably the space that Malin and I struggle the most in, like in our friendship and even, in our work on our podcast is, I think there are times where I can even think in the last week where I'm like, how do you not see? Right. And it's like, I get impassioned and frustrated about it. Probably because I do lie over here more than I should. And, he is over here saying, why are you freaking out? Because he's over here. And I don't know that I'm always really good at taking into consideration that capacity. When it's people close to me that I care about, I feel like it's way easier for me to lend that grace or that understanding to someone that I don't know, than it is for me to lend that to the people around me that I care about, because I care about them and I want them to, be the very best they can be, or whatever that drive is for us to, help sharpen each other in those close relationships. But it is really difficult, I think, to take capacity or even growth in that area. I guess for me, I'm always hopeful that as human beings, I feel like in my own life, I have seen just this constant growth. You know what I mean? Like, I become aware of something, I learn about it, I understand myself in relation to this thing that I learned, and I grow, and my perspective changes and grows over time, right? And I feel like that's like the cool part of life, right? It's the growth that we get to see in ourselves from point A to point B. And so to me, I'm always hopeful that if we can be mindful of these kind of things, if we can be mindful of other people's perspective, if we can be mindful of other voices and other experiences, then you may not be in a space where you can offer empathy in those spaces, but if you can at least understand that their experience is different than my own, then that's how we can better cohabitate as humans. And that, I feel, is a space that we are just really struggling with right now, is this ability to understand that your experience and my experience can exist in the same space, and
Yes.
they can go down the same parallel path, and it can all be okay. Like, it doesn't have to be so black and white and so yes or no. So yeah.
My mind has changed on empathy this entire conversation, I feel like. Just with all the different perspectives and understanding other people's capacity or perception of the world. Like, Malin, I've loved the things that you have said and like the challenging thoughts and stuff, because I am a very empathetic person, I feel like, or a feeling person, but also we feel from our own ego. Is that the best way to describe it? Like, we feel from our own ego, and therefore what we're feeling and our perspectives mean more than yours in a way. And so when you have a conversation, there is a growth of how much of that do you bring to each perspective, and because you want them to grow and you're really passionate about whatever topic, your empathy changes based on the situation.
Well, and let me ask you a question is, how much should somebody care about somebody else's feelings? Who gets to decide that? And what makes it right or wrong? At what level does it become okay and you're in the right category versus it's not enough and you're in the wrong category? And the answer to that question, I believe, is it's left up to each of us. Mm-hmm. So the only thing that I'm asking is for people that if you find someone who's not very empathetic, all the things we've been talking about, maybe this person's not capable of being much more. Maybe there's other things going on in their life. Who knows? But I think as a good perspective in this conversation, we have to realize that we're all judging everybody else's empathy muscle in relation to our own. And that doesn't mean one's right or wrong. It means you're just recognizing a difference in someone. And so can we help people get better? If people have the desire, yes. But I just want to pause there and just say, to me, that's the really important perspective that we need to have is who gets to say who has the right amount of empathy versus someone who doesn't. I mean, we can talk about the outliers. Those are very clear. But I'm talking like your everyday individuals that you run into someone and be like, man, that person's so unfeeling. Well, maybe in your world, but maybe in his world, what if he's the most empathetic person he knows and interacts with on a day-to-day basis?
Wow.
And I completely agree with that. Exactly. I completely agree with that. And I also would love to see more space then for people to decide that they don't want to make space for that. You know what I mean? So a lot of times I'm seeing like, oh, so-and-so unfriended me on the Facebook. And so now it's like, or I decided I don't want to make space for that in my circle. Right. Like I agree with you, Malin. And I guess I also would love to see that, if we all get to make that choice, then maybe that choice could be respected. And I don't know if that takes empathy or not, but to be able to say like, I choose not to have that in my life, and I'm going to protect myself or protect my peace or whatever that is. And then that not be like, not make you part of the problem. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Well, it makes perfect sense to me. And just to jump in here really fast, we did an episode not too long ago. Well, it's been a while, I guess. It seems like yesterday. Remember, Jamie, when we did the episode on love? And we went through all the different definitions of love.
Oh, yeah.
And I want to say that I think a lot of people, me included, they equate that you have to be, if you don't have strong empathy, you're not a kind person. You're not a loving person. You're incapable of providing love or kindness. And if one thing, after all that research that I did on the actual definition of love, is that you can have someone who's strong in love and kindness and weak in empathy. And it doesn't sound like that should happen, but I think it does. And I think
Totally.
Yeah, they're not equal. And I wondered how many people's conversations and relationships, people try to make those two be the same. So if you have strong empathy, you have strong capacity for love and kindness. And I think if we can break that to say they can be equally there, but at different levels, and one doesn't necessarily impact the other, I think a big understanding starts evolving in this area.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
There's something, I was trying to find it before we started this, because I love starting with sort of like the definition or everybody's understanding of what a topic is. And there was something I saw years ago. If anybody's listening to this and can find it again, please send it to me. But it had to do with, it was like this little cartoon that showed a story of someone being hurt. And it was like compassion and empathy. There was some sort of a definition that was being played out in this, and it blew my mind. It completely changed my perspective because I realized I didn't actually understand what the definition was because of the way that like you're not really taught it. And Jamie, it seems like you're
I was going to say, I know exactly what it's Brene Brown.
Okay.
And it was taken from a presentation she had done, and then someone illustrated that part of the presentation. And it was like empathy and sympathy and empathy and compassion. And yeah, she kind of went into several different pieces of that, and how to help a friend when they're in that space. And if you YouTube Brene Brown empathy, you should find the video. It's super cute. And it's really, it puts legs, I think, to that idea of what it even is that we're talking about. Because I think there is a pretty big misunderstanding sometimes that empathy is understanding, or empathy is sympathy, right? And those are two very different things. So I don't necessarily like, empathy isn't feeling bad for someone in a difficult situation, right? Empathy is being able to accept their experiences for what their experiences are.
Right, their perspective.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, Malin.
Yeah.
I have another hard question then for the group around that, Jamie. And you've heard this before, so let's see if Steph and Steph can weigh in. But then I'm not going to say in all areas, but again, just take this example. You know, even in this conversation, our previous conversations, Jamie, I'm sure you guys, Steph and Steph, you've had your own conversations. You know, trying to exercise empathy in this political climate, social climate, whatever you want to go to. And I don't want this to be a political statement, but I'm saying we all say we want people to be empathetic, and we want people to empathize with us more. And in order to show empathy, you have to be able to let like a certain level of understanding around where somebody's at, and you have to show them that. I can't tell you how many times in the last 4 years, and I'm sure it's not going to change in the next 4 years, that I have been shot down when I said, hey, I understand where you're coming from. You can't possibly understand. You have no way of knowing. You don't walk in my shoes. Well, I'm trying to give you the best that I can. And to me, empathy is an olive branch. And what happens when the person on the other side doesn't accept your empathy? That doesn't make you not empathetic. That makes them not willing to recognize the empathy you're trying to give them for whatever reason, social, economical, whatever it is, political views, it doesn't matter. And I think that is another big issue that we should probably talk about in this space and in this conversation is when people don't want to take your empathy because they don't think that it's authentic, when all you have to offer them is what you are, and you're coming from a place of true authenticity, and this is all I can, and I'm trying so desperately to show you that empathy, and it just gets slapped out of your hand because they think you're not genuine enough. Am I the only one, or is there other people that have had similar experiences?
Yeah, that's not a.
This drives me crazy. Yeah, it drives me crazy.
The only thing I would say to that, Malin, is that you know, there's empathy. There's the act of practicing empathy. But what does that really mean even? What does it mean to practice empathy? Empathy doesn't do any good if I sit in my own little space and say, that's really an interesting perspective that I've never heard before. But when you think about empathy as a verb, empathy in action, what does that mean? And I think for myself, in the spaces where I have become frustrated, in the charged climate that we live in, are those spaces where it's, well, I understand where you're coming from, but let me throw all the reasons you're wrong in your face, or not actually taking the time to listen to another perspective and just assuming, or, you know, there's action behind that. I think that definitely clouds this space where I don't know that it's always, and I'm not even saying one side or another, because I think it comes from both sides. I think that is, if there's one lesson that I can take away since November, is that, maybe the side that I tend to land on, and I think that we're supposed to be an empathetic people on this side of the aisle that I reside on, maybe we haven't done enough listening either. Maybe we haven't heard some of the struggles of people who voted the way they did opposite of me, right? And so I feel like there's some inaction pieces that are missing that make it difficult for someone to hear, hey, I have empathy and I understand where you're coming from. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I think once you start throwing in, I understand where you're coming from, or I get your point, but then you add but or however, you're not listening. You're literally, you're just trying to make a point. You're just trying to add, like, it almost seems disingenuous to say, I get where you're coming from, but. And I get that because I have very weird political views. I'm like right in the center, so I basically disagree with everybody, um, which means I do a lot of listening, and every time I go to talk, nobody listens to me except for Steph. Um, exactly. But it drives me crazy. Like it's like, do you understand where I'm coming from, or are you just waiting your turn? Are you just waiting to share?
I think we need another episode to discuss the verb empathy. What does empathy look like in action?
Yeah.
That I think could be very, very powerful to really help people understand what it is, like what that actually is, and therefore how they can do it. Because I think, like we talked about, people don't understand what it actually looks like. And that's something that has been massively part of my growth, is I'm constantly going, but what does that mean? What does that look like? Show me what it is in practice. So then my brain can wrap around, because I want to, but I just don't know what that looks like.
Well, and to add on to that, and I think this kind of touches on Jamie's rebuttal to my discussion earlier, is what's the expectation of that? Meaning, I'm showing you empathy. Is the person I'm trying to show empathy to, are you expecting it to be in a certain way and it's not being presented that way? So therefore it's either not rejected, or it's not sincere enough, or it's disingenuous. So I think there's an element to that as well. When we talk about what is the action of empathy, we also have to take some accountability as the person who's receiving that empathy, not to just qualify it for what we expect empathy to look like. And again, I will say, if we're expecting people to give us empathy, are we communicating that need clearly enough? Because I think, to me, there's a difference between I need someone to show me empathy, or I need someone to show me empathy in this way at this moment. And I think that is drastically different. And and maybe someone like me, I'll go back to our conversation that Jamie had before we even got on with recording with you guys. To be clearly spoken to say, I don't need someone to fix a problem right now. I just need someone to listen. That expectation was set and given, right?
Yeah.
Versus, just to say, you don't understand, you're not empathetic, I'm frustrated now, I'm walking away. Well, as a person, you were expecting that certain level of empathy. Did you communicate that? Because just expecting empathy, and then when it arrives in a different form than you wanted, and then you getting mad at the other person or discounting the other person, that's not fair. And the person on the other end of that relationship, if they struggle with empathy to begin with, they're not going to be able to read the signs very well, or the nonverbal cues, or you're expecting someone who is very immature in this emotional arena to be able to look across and just examine your feelings. That is a very unfair ask. And I think that is also another element that, if you have this other conversation, you almost have to dive into, because I think it's a huge disadvantage to people and relationships.
Absolutely. I mean, just off the top of my head, one of the things that I like to do now is, when I have somebody coming to me asking, like, just wanting to talk, the first thing that I say is, Do you want me to listen or do you want me to give advice? And it is such a game changer because they get to tell me exactly what they're looking for out of this conversation, and I can give it to them. And if I'm not in the other thing that I do too is when I'm looking for empathy, I will specifically say what I'm looking for. And I'll ask the other person, do you have the capacity to listen to what I'm about to say? Because it's heavy, or it's about this, or it's about this topic. And if they don't, I let them know that it's fine, and I'll find somebody else to talk to. But I think that taking responsibility for asking what kind of empathy somebody needs, as well as asking if it's okay to like ask for empathy with your own situation, can really help.
Yeah.
Well, I think the other piece that can help a ton too is I have learned to take the phrase "I understand where you're coming from" out of my vocabulary. And part of that is just an extension of the work that I do. But I had to get to a space where I could know that there is no way I will ever really understand where they're coming from or what their experience is. But just to be open and even to say that, I will never understand what you've been through, but I really do want to hear more. Can you tell me more about what that was like so I can have a better understanding or whatever, I think that's a piece that we haven't really touched a ton on is, empathy is, I feel like empathy is more opening your mind up to the possibility that you don't have the full story.
Yes.
Right? That we can't assume intentionality. We can't assume motive. We can't assume a lot of different things because we don't actually know where those things are coming from, whatever it might be. And I think that's the hard space. That's the hard space I find myself in a ton right now is that I assume because of your political affiliation, because of your religious affiliation, because of your maybe your geographical location, because of whatever, all of these things, I often find myself assuming that I know what their motivation might be or what their beliefs might be or whatever. And I find myself the victim of that a lot also. It's assumed, all of these things. And that I think is probably, if we can put empathy in action, I feel like that is probably the place to start, is that, we stop making assumptions. We stop assuming where intention is coming from and start assuming positive intentionality, because I think most of the time we're just people and we're just trying to live our best lives and we're trying to be good human beings, and good human beings have positive intentions. And if we can go into interactions assuming positive intent, I think that is like a huge step of empathy that would be helpful in most interactions that we have where we are today.
Yeah. Get rid of all the labels, get rid of the pretense, get rid of truly, like the example you gave, you don't know about the coffee. You don't know anybody else's story. You don't know anybody else's situation. You don't know any of their beliefs, values, life experiences that cause them to react, assume, take action, make decisions on anything. So when we lump people via these labels, we just have like this weird automatic assumption of, oh, you're this way, but actually they're not. Like everybody exists on a spectrum. And when we go back to, I'm a human being, you're a human being. I understand that I have different perspectives, different life experiences, different situations, and your life isn't going to look exactly like mine. Your brain isn't going to function exactly like mine. When we go back to that, I think we have that much more, we soften and therefore have a little bit more capacity to be open to somebody else. And we get to choose whether we switch our mindset to that in that moment, if we have the capacity to do that in that moment. So empathy is completely nuanced and situational for every everything.
Yes.
So let me ask this group this question. What is more important, empathy or compassion?
I think we need the definitions.
Of empathy and compassion?
I think so, just to be sure.
Because here's where I struggle too. And there is a definition that I found that Jamie doesn't even know this yet, because after our episode and after so many times of bringing empathy up, I really wanted to do some self-reflection on why empathy is so hard for me and to grow in that space. But before I get there, what I really want to just kind of lay out is empathy is given with conditions, right? And I would say all of us would look at every situation, and I think I kind of heard you say it too, Steph. There are certain situations where everybody would agree that empathy is needed, versus there will be times in our lives and situations where empathy is not needed or not warranted to give to another person. And I think that's where I'm stuck the most with empathy, is because it is actional. It's based off actions. So I think when you perceive somebody's actions, you'll give them a certain level of, oh, I need to show them empathy. And I have an example. If you had somebody who was homeless, who, was, not eating, not clean, and they were caught shoplifting food, and they were thrown in jail for 90 days. Okay. There may be some empathy that we'd be able to provide somebody, versus, and I'm going to go to the real big extreme here. Like, this is meant to be completely opposite. Somebody who either physically beats or harms another person and then robs them. We don't know the backstory of either one of these individuals. But given those two examples, which one are we more likely to give empathy to? Just hearing that information, which one would we give empathy to?
Probably the first guy, the homeless person.
And it's because we're taking in information that we see at the moment and we're making judgment calls, right? Like, we can see the tangible. We can see the evidence all around. Our heart goes out to individuals that they're homeless. We assume, well, that person didn't want to be homeless. Something must have happened. Well, I grew up in a town where we had a gentleman who was the local bum, air quotes, who had money in the bank, but he chose to be homeless because that's just the lifestyle he wanted. And so my point is, to when we're thinking of this, is I do think we do the best we can, but the information that's presented to us is flawed in and of itself, because what we use most of the time is people's actions or how they perceive themselves. And that might be wrong to do, but I can't find of another way that we can consume information differently. I'll stop there.
I was going to say, can I jump in for a second? Because I think again, though, if our empathy is based on a judgment, then our empathy isn't truly empathy, right? And I guess, to me, I feel like if I see you as deserving of empathy, as opposed to someone who deserved what they got, I don't know that is true empathy. You know what I mean?
It's almost like the LA fires. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, just real fast, my Google AI, my personal Google AI, which is probably skewed to the things that I search and look at, right? Because that's how life works these days. But it says that the empathy is the ability to understand and share the feelings of others, while compassion is the desire to help those people. So to me, it's like empathy is more about gaining understanding, and compassion might be more that action piece of it, maybe. But yeah, I think we have to be really careful about how we judge worthiness for our empathy, for our compassion, for sympathy. I think that we have to be really careful with that. And all of that comes from a space of our own perspective, even. If I can step outside of my own perspective and say, that guy doesn't deserve my empathy or anything from me because he committed a crime and he's in jail and he deserves that. The homeless guy, he doesn't want to be homeless and he needs my empathy. is different than if I have a little different understanding. I might know that this guy committed a crime because he wasn't able to get a job to make enough money to provide for his family, and he stole something to try and provide that need, right? And if you know some of the backstory, it might provide more empathy, but that's all based on my judgment. We have to be really careful about that space, I think.
Yeah, it's all based on your personal choice of how much empathy you want to give to a situation based on the judgments and labels that you are putting on other people, based on the information that you have at hand. So if you take those two scenarios, you have the choice to go, do I want to understand this person's perspective if they are a murderer? Like if I'm being told that they murdered somebody. Like it is a personal choice whether you are empathetic or whether you are compassionate. So if you're being told someone murdered or someone's homeless, yes, there's an automatic response based on the information, but you also have the choice to choose, you know what? I don't know this person's situation. I don't know why they did this. I don't know why they're homeless, but I can ask the questions and I can try and put myself in their shoes. I have to know what their shoes are first. So I have to talk to them. I have to have some form of a conversation to truly be empathetic of their situation. Like I have to get more information to really understand. And compassion is the other part of wanting to help them. Like it's a personal choice based on absolute perspective. And the only way that you change to gain a more truer perspective is with more information that you get by asking more questions.
Do you have to? Oh,
no, you're good.
Do you have to like speak to somebody or like know more to have empathy? Because like I know I'm like obsessive over these LA fires. I'm just mind boggled by them. It's just so crazy what's happening. And the number of people that I see on the internet being like, well, they're all rich, so they'll be fine if their house is burned down. And that to me is just such a lack of empathy, like just blatant lack of empathy without knowing any information. And I'm not sure that if those same people got more information on, no, actually this actor was a working actor, or this person, like, their house was handed down to them from generation to generations. And yes, it was worth a lot of money, but it was all they had. Like if somebody's saying, oh, they're rich, therefore it doesn't matter if their house burned down, if they got more information, would they really be that much more empathetic, or I don't know.
See, now you're touching on stuff. I think the heart of the analogy that I was bringing up is that to me, you're even expressing now the level of compassion towards these individuals, right? Like, can I ever understand somebody having to flee their house as their neighborhood and their house gets incinerated and they lose everything? I can't. I've never been there. I will never, in my current state, and I hope it doesn't change, I cannot empathize with somebody else who's gone through that because I have never experienced it. I have a coworker who lives in that space and they had to flee their home, and even hearing it firsthand on what this individual had to do, I'm sitting over there going, I'm trying to relate to everything you're saying, and I cannot because I have never experienced it. But what I can give them is compassion. What I can give them is an understanding and grace. Like if they miss a deadline at work, because this is a coworker, I can give them an extension of being like, they're going through a lot. I'm going to go ahead and give them grace. I'm going to give them compassion. But the one thing that I can't give them is I can't give them empathy. If empathy is understanding what somebody else is going through, there's no way. I've never experienced that.
So that even that is empathetic, to be able to say, I understand that this is a really hard experience for you, and I have never experienced that. So your experience is outside of my own understanding. I feel like that alone is an act of empathy.
Yeah,
to be able to say, I am not going to judge your experience because I don't have experiences to compare.
I think that's actually highly empathetic.
I do too. I do too. That is an act of empathy.
It's highly empathetic to understand, look, I'm trying to understand it from your perspective. I've never experienced anything like that. So the only thing that I'm able to offer you is my compassion in this situation and be here however you need me to. That's highly empathetic. So Malin, good job.
Okay, and I don't. Well, thank you very much. No, I don't know when we're wrapping up, but one thing I wanted
right about now, yeah.
Okay, because one thing before we close, is I've done some research in the past, and one of the things that I've come across, and I want to dig deeper. I don't know if anybody here's heard about it or heard of it. Have anybody heard about empathetic distress or empathy burnout? Because in the light research that I've been doing, I feel like I hit this threshold really a lot sooner than say maybe someone like Jamie. And so it's a new term. I haven't dug too much into it, but I wanted to bring it up in this conversation since we're talking about empathy and to see if anybody else has had any experience around that term or have heard that term before.
No.
Well, there's also, to go along with that, there's also compassion fatigue. That's another thing that happens. And I think it depends. I think your experience of what did you call it? Empathy burnout? Is that what you said, Malin?
Yes, it's empathetic distress or empathy burnout.
That's really, I think there have been, and maybe hear me out. Maybe that's part of what we're seeing collectively as people right now is empathy burnout.
Yeah.
Because if I think about those spaces, and I've been in those spaces, I work in a field where empathy is required. It is a job requirement to be empathetic. And sometimes you just want to be like, you know what? I'm sorry, you deserved what you got, right? Like, I mean, you just get to a space where it's when you see someone that struggles over and over and over again or whatever, you lose the ability to be super empathetic when you see people make choices or whatever to put themselves in that situation over and over again. I almost wonder if that's where we're at. Because I think not just like the LA fires, but you were also, do you remember the United Healthcare CEO thing?
Oh, yeah.
A whole drove of people were like, yeah, he probably deserved it because he's a capitalist, whatever, like insert your label here. And there were people who were like fans of the guy that assassinated this man. And it made no sense to me. I was so confused by that. And I kind of wonder, now that you say that, Malin, I wonder if maybe we are just kind of, as a people, maybe we have gotten to a space where hearing other people's experiences and their spaces is really hard because we haven't been heard or because, there's just so much strife. I'm wondering if maybe that's part of what's going on.
That resonates so deeply.
Yeah. The last 4 years, how much division, empathy we had to feel and compassion and it was
years,
just
really.
It's been even longer than that, but we've been told to our value based in whatever, where you had to be compassionate and empathetic towards somebody else, and if you weren't, then you were slandered or whatever, but nobody could hear your perspective either unless you fell into one of the chunks. And even then there's a whole group of people that is not willing to hear your spot anyways. So
half of the people,
right? Literally. Just ridiculous. Yes, burnout, everything. And so you turn off. It's like, well, if you can't hear me, I'm not going to hear you. It's like a massive toddler tantrum happening. All the adults went crazy. We all need to be in daycare.
These poor children. Oh my God. They're probably like, what is going on?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
I think we need to have a whole other conversation of more because this has been a massive conversation. And I think we've touched on so many incredible things. Guys, I would love to have that love episode that we can drop into our show notes so people can go back to that and tie in, because I'd love to listen to that one for sure.
Yeah.
I hope that was after we got better audio equipment. I don't know. I feel like we need a disclaimer. I don't know. Do you remember?
I think it was actually.
Oh, good. Okay.
On our podcasting journey, we have a definite line in the sand where our audio really kind of clicked up a few levels, and I think it was after, or I think it was before we recorded that one. But
Hey,
I will be sure to send you the link.
remember, they're listening to our podcast of where we don't have the best audio equipment. So your podcast is fine.
We don't have like any audio equipment. We just kind of raw dog it.
Thank you guys so much for coming and having this conversation. It has been amazing. I love having the dual perspectives from you guys. This has been a really freaking good conversation, and I am going to be thinking about this for quite some time.
Yeah. And I just have to say, I want to have you guys like drop your handles and whatnot, but I love your guys' friendship. It's like, I love it. Like, I love the banter. I love that you guys are on opposite sides of so many things, but yet, like, they're just the love. Like, you just, I don't know. I love it.
People can
and that's where, really the heart of Roundtable Mindset was born is, Jamie and I, we've been through a lot, and our relationship and our friendship started when we were small kids, and we both changed and grew into different people. And we've had, it almost sounds like it would be, we've hated each other at times. We've, loved each other at times. We've despised each other at
Talking
times.
about this Tuesday.
Yeah, exactly. And I think over all of it, what's transpired is we've learned to respect each other more than anything. And that respect kind of cascades through generations. And if I can put a plug for any kind of relationship, friendship that lasts for that many years, it has to be built on that respect, because by goodness, I can say whatever I want to say to Jamie, but I better not hear somebody else disrespect Jamie, because I'll be the first one. So it's almost like a brother-sister relationship at this point.
Which is way fun when our friends are listening to our podcast and they have crappy things to say about Malin's opinion or my opinion. I'm sure that's hard for you too, but man, that's a hard space to be.
Yeah, it is, but it's fun. And it's good to be able to challenge one another. I think that's the other thing. A whole point of Roundtable Mindset is you don't have to see the world the way I see it, but just be open enough to hear what I have to say.
I think right there, the fact that you do listen to each other, that is the ultimate form of empathy. Just saying.
For sure. I think so too.
We don't always do what the other one wants, but we try to listen. Take notes and be like, nope.
Even if it's to take notes and remind each other why we're wrong. That's
So well, thank you. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, thanks for having us on. This has been a lot of fun. I don't think we've both been able to guest on someone else's podcast yet, so this is a good time.
Yeah, this is great.
Thank you both. I hope we can do this again. I think it's really great to have all of this conversation and different points of view and things you can take away. I always try to find one little nugget that I want to kind of take back and mull over. And I think this conversation had a lot in there. So I appreciate you.
Oh, yeah.
It was a lot of fun.
Absolutely. Real quick, do you guys want to share where everybody can find you? And then we'll say goodbye.
Sure. We are on, take a deep breath. Just kidding. We are on Facebook and Instagram and TikTok and Threads, and we have a channel on X. Basically, if you have a social media account, more than likely we have some sort of avenue there. I also just want to say we do have new episodes that drop the second and fourth Thursday of every month. So, come take a listen to some of our past conversations. We'd love to have you come in and listen. But again, thank you so much for letting us come on.
Of course. Thank you so much. And if you guys loved this episode, be sure to rate it, review it, share it with a friend. Let us know in the reviews or comments what you loved, what you disagreed with, what you just extra thoughts if you want to expand on anything. We love to hear from you guys. And be sure to stay tuned for another episode next Thursday.
Bye, guys.